What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be talking all about recoil and the various attachments for Vanguard weapons that impact our recoil. And this video is actually going to be applying to both Vanguard's multiplayer as well as Warzone, at least for the Vanguard weapons. And this is just meant to clear up any sort of questions about these various recoil affecting attachments, because there are so many of them for Vanguard weapons, and many people just don't quite fully understand what each of them do and which ones are going to be the best for your particular setup. And the great thing about this, it turns out I did a bunch of testing in Warzone Pacific, and then I compared that to my testing with Vanguard's multiplayer. And while some of the recoil patterns for various guns have been adjusted a little bit, like with the Automaton for instance, we do have an exaggerated recoil pattern in Warzone compared to multiplayer, the exact same trends at least hold true. So the information in this, at least currently, is going to be interchangeable between Vanguard's multiplayer and Warzone. But let's just hop right into it, and one of the most common stats that you'll see on attachments that impacts your recoil is Recoil Control. And this one is fairly basic. This is just your total magnitude of recoil. So this is just how much your gun will kick upwards as you continue to fire. Generally speaking, this is going to be applying primarily to the vertical recoil control. And oftentimes I've noticed it barely helps with horizontal recoil, if at all. Although with some attachments, even though they have the same description of recoil control, they can have various effects on your vertical and horizontal recoil. And that kind of goes for a lot of these attachments as well. You can have the exact same like plus initial recoil stat or plus recoil recovery or something. Two attachments might have the exact same labeled description like this, but they won't necessarily have the same exact impact. Some of them will have more of an impact and some of them will have less of an impact. In either case, that's our basic recoil control stats. That's the sort of all-around stat that generally just reduces the amount of recoil you see overall. Next, let's talk about recoil recovery, and this is also known as center speed. This is what it's actually coded as in the game. And essentially with this one, this is how quickly your gun will return back to its initial point of aim after firing a bullet. So every time you fire a shot with your gun, it's going to kick upward, and then it will automatically start to come back down to center. So if you just fire one bullet with a gun, you can see this very clearly. It kicks up, and then it returns back to your initial point of aim. This recoil recovery stat, or your center speed stats, this is how quickly it's able to return back to center. And this is applying as you're firing full auto as well. Between each one of those shots, it is trying to pull back down like a magnet toward your initial point of aim. And the higher your recoil recovery stat, or the higher your center speed, the stronger that pull back toward your initial point of aim will be. And this recoil recovery stat is best for guns that have a lot of view kick. So if you see your actual screen go upwards as you're firing your gun full auto, and it rises up, especially if it rises up quite quickly, this is where recoil recovery is going to be helping you a lot. Whereas guns that have a lot of gun kick, so this is just sort of that side-to-side recoil, or maybe not a high magnitude of recoil, but there's like a lot of recoil within a smaller area, that recoil recovery stat isn't going to be quite as important for you. After that, let's talk about the accuracy stat, and this is something I have covered for Vanguard's multiplayer in the past. This essentially determines how much aim down sight spread, or bloom, your weapon has. And this aim down sight spread is random inaccuracy with even the first shot that you fire. If you have a very low accuracy stats, that bullet isn't necessarily going to be going on your point of aim. In fact, it can actually go pretty far away from your initial point of aim. So it's the inherent inaccuracy of the gun itself, and it has nothing to do with your ability to control the recoil or you as a player. It's literally randomized. So the more you increase this accuracy stat on a gun, the tighter that spread is going to be while aiming down sights, and therefore the more precise your gun is going to be. When you pull the trigger, that bullet is actually going to go where you're aiming. Whereas if you decrease this accuracy stat significantly, it's going to be basically a gamble when you pull that trigger. Even if you're perfectly on target, it's going to be a gamble as to whether or not you hit that target. Now, it's very important to point out that they have stated in Warzone, they're actually going to be eliminating the aim down sight spread or bloom mechanic. And in order to compensate for this, apparently they are going to be increasing recoil on various weapons. So just keep that in mind. Down the road, this is no longer going to apply to Warzone, but it will still apply to multiplayer unless they also decide to remove it from there, but I don't think they will. But until then, at least, it is pretty important to have accuracy attachments on at least many of the guns that have a lot of bloom. Most importantly for assault rifles, the AS-44 and the Volkssturmgewehr, and then also for most of the SMGs in the game as well, if you plan on stretching the range out even just a little bit. But after that, let's get into sustained versus initial recoil. And these ones might sound pretty self-explanatory, but I wanted to break them down to see exactly how they work. And I think I've got a pretty good handle on it so far, although this may vary a little bit from weapon to weapon. When it comes to that initial accuracy and recoil stat, this appears to apply to the first 7 or so bullets fired when you're firing full auto. Now again, this may vary slightly depending on the gun, but it seems to be that first 7 to 8 shots that are fired. And then on the flip side of that, if we're looking at sustained accuracy and recoil control, this seems to apply to the shots that are after the 7th or so shot that is fired when you're firing full auto. And when it comes to Vanguard's multiplayer, that initial accuracy and recoil stat is extremely important because in most gunfights, it's going to be over before that 7th shot is even fired, so obviously that's the area of recoil you want to focus on the most. When it comes to Warzone, on the other hand, I still feel initial accuracy and recoil is important. Of course, you want to be hitting those shots, you don't want your gun kicking way off target immediately after you hit your first bullet. However, I feel like you want to aim for more of a balance when it comes to Warzone. You definitely don't want to be sacrificing much of your sustained accuracy and recoil control, because it quite simply takes a lot more bullets to kill, and also our engagement ranges are also a lot longer, so it's a higher chance that we're going to be missing shots as well. So even if your gun can kill in 7 bullets against a fully plated enemy, for most players, if you're stretching out that range a little bit, it's going to be more like 15 shots to actually get the kill on a player. So in Warzone, I'm looking for much more of a balance between initial recoil and sustained recoil. Whereas, like I said, in multiplayer, initial recoil is far more valuable most of the time than sustained accuracy or recoil. And with that, that pretty much wraps it up for the primary attachment types that are going to be directly impacting our recoil in Vanguard as well as Warzone, for Vanguard weapons at least. And you might be wondering, which one of these is most important? Which should I be focusing on the most? And the interesting thing I have found in my testing is you probably want to be going for variety if possible. Instead of focusing just on recoil control and putting as many attachments as possible on that recoil control stat, you're likely better off to choose maybe 1 or 2 attachments that help with recoil control, maybe 1 other attachment that helps with accuracy, and then if you've got the space for it, another attachment that helps with initial recoil, and maybe even another one that helps with sustained recoil. And there's a reason we want diversification when it comes to these attachments, and this is just how the attachments stack and interact in this game. It turns out you do have diminishing returns as you continue to stack with the same type of attachment. And this applies for everything from aim down sight time to recoil control. All of these stats either have a hard cap, so you literally can't get any better than a certain number, or you just have diminishing returns as you continue to stack multiple of these same types of attachments that are helping with the same stat. So generally speaking, diversification with these stats is going to be a very good thing, especially in Warzone, where you want a really good balance of stats. However, in multiplayer, like I said, really all you need to worry about is that initial recoil in most situations for most setups and playstyles. Now, of course, if you're trying to use an LMG as an LMG and like lock down lanes and pick off like 4 enemies at once by unloading 50 rounds all at once, sure, it's not just initial recoil you want to be focusing on, but most of the time, that initial recoil is what really counts in multiplayer, much more so than Warzone. And with that, that's gonna wrap it up for today's video. I really hope this video was able to shed some light on these various attachments that impact our recoil and exactly what they do. And this is where I want to hear from you guys. What do you think about the fact that we have so many different types of recoil controlling attachments out there when it comes to Vanguard weapons? Do you like the fact that we can control specific elements with various attachments? Or would you prefer if it was just basic recoil control and that's it? Maybe just vertical recoil and horizontal recoil control, and those were the only stats you had to worry about. Basically like we've seen with the previous couple years with Cold War as well as Modern Warfare. Which system do you think is best to have? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.